Some stories begin quietly and then hit you like a punch you never saw coming. This one starts with a man the world thought was finished, and a homeowners association that made one mistake too many. And by the time they realized who they were dealing with, it was already too late. Before we begin, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You're about to hear a story you won't forget. On a slow Monday morning in Willow Creek, the kind of neighborhood where people trim their lawns more often than they talk to their neighbors, a letter arrived at the small brick house on Maple Ridge Lane. It was addressed to Daniel Hart, a 54-year-old disabled veteran who moved here hoping for nothing more than a quiet life. He walked with a limp, a reminder of the explosion in Afghanistan. That took more from him than mobility, but it never took his pride. Daniel lived simply, a ramp by his front steps, a flag he raised every morning, even on days his hands shook, and a service dog named Jasper who never left his side. The neighborhood barely noticed him until the HOA decided to. The letter sitting inside his mailbox was printed in cold, official wording, the kind that's written by people who hide behind rules instead of courage. It read, "You are in violation of community standards. Remove the wheelchair ramp within 14 days or face penalties, fines, and further action." Daniel froze, not because he was afraid, but because he couldn't believe that anyone would ever see a wheelchair ramp as a violation. He read the line again, and again. His jaw tightened. Not from anger, from disbelief. This ramp wasn't decoration. It was his independence, his dignity, his way of surviving. He looked up toward the HOA office. Across the street, the building with the clean white siding and manicured hedges, guarded by people who never fought for anything except their own comfort. He folded the letter once, then again, slipped it into his pocket, and whispered to himself, "All right, if this is the fight you want, then this is the fight you'll get." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone. He didn't complain. But that moment, quiet as it was, the moment everything changed. Because Daniel was not the kind of man who backed down from danger. He faced bullets, blasts, and nights so dark they didn't feel real. An HOA? He could handle that in his sleep. What he did next, no one in Willow Creek was ready for. And by the time the HOA understood what was coming, the entire neighborhood would be standing in their windows, watching history unfold on their own street. The next morning, the neighborhood was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. Michael rolled his chair toward the front door, expecting the usual morning breeze, the flag swaying above the porch. But something else waited for him. A bright orange notice, pasted right in the center of his door, not even respectfully placed, just slapped there, like a warning on an abandoned house. Michael pulled it off, unfolded it slowly, and the words nearly made him choke. "You have been found in violation of HOA Code 14B. Unauthorized structure, unauthorized display, and non-compliance with uniform appearance standards. Remove all items within 72 hours or face fines, force compliance, or legal action." He reread the sentence that hit hardest. Forced compliance. Those two words weren't new to him. He'd heard them overseas, from commanders, from orders, from situations where he had no choice but to obey to keep his team alive. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his home, his safe place, the one thing he believed no one could ever take from him again. For a few seconds, he simply stared at the paper, not angry, not emotional, just disappointed, because this wasn't about a mailbox. It wasn't about the small ramp he built for his wheelchair. It wasn't even about the flag that hung above his porch. This was about someone trying to intimidate him, trying to push him out quietly, trying to remind him that even here, even after all he'd sacrificed, someone could still pull rank. He folded the notice carefully, placed it on the table, and rolled forward. His service dog, Ranger, sensed his tension immediately. The German Shepherd pressed his head against Michael's leg, grounding him the way only a service dog could. "I'm okay," Michael whispered, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The ramp he built wasn't unauthorized. It was medically required. The flag wasn't non-compliant. It was the very symbol of why he could still live freely on this street. And the mailbox? It wasn't unaesthetic. It was designed by his late father, a veteran before him. Every item on that notice carried a memory, a story. a piece of him. This wasn't just harassment. This was personal. And then came the moment that changed everything. As Michael looked down the street, he saw 3 HOA board members walking house to house, clipboard in hand, pointing at his home, whispering as they moved. They weren't inspecting the neighborhood. They were setting an example. A disabled veteran, their target. Michael exhaled slowly. He'd faced worse. He'd survived worse. But this time, he wouldn't be using weapons, tactics, or orders. He would use something far stronger. The truth. And it was time the HOA learned exactly who they were dealing with. The next morning arrived quietly. But the tension in the neighborhood was impossible to ignore. For the first time in months, Daniel rolled his wheelchair down the driveway with purpose. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't holding back tears. He wasn't shrinking into himself. He was ready. But what he didn't know was that the HOA had arrived early too. 3 board members stood outside his home, clipboards in hand, whispering to each other as if they were inspecting a crime scene. They weren't there to talk. They were there to intimidate. As Daniel approached, the HOA president, Clyde Whitmore, forced a fake smile, the kind that stretched his lips but never reached his eyes. "Mr. Walker," he said, "we need to finalize the violation notice today. If you refuse, we will proceed with fines and potential removal of the unauthorized items from your property. Unauthorized items. That's what they called the ramp keeping him mobile, and the flag symbolizing the country he fought to protect." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He didn't show anger. He simply asked, "Have any of you ever served?" All 3 shook their heads. "Then you'll never understand what it feels like to fight for a home you might never return to," he continued softly. "And now, I'm fighting again, not overseas, not in uniform, just to live with dignity." Clyde's smile vanished. Before the HOA could respond, neighbors began stepping out of their houses. One by one, quiet, watchful, supportive. Word had spread. By the time a minute passed, more than a dozen residents stood behind Daniel, retired families, young parents, kids on bikes, people who had lived in this street for years, but never truly seen what was happening right in front of them. Daniel wasn't alone anymore. Clyde cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the growing crowd. "This is a private discussion," he muttered. A neighbor called out, "No, Clyde, it's not. When you threaten the most respected man on this street, it becomes everyone's business." Another woman stepped forward. "He saved lives. You can't even let him live." The HOA members stiffened. Daniel could feel a shift in the air, a quiet, powerful shift. After months of being overlooked, dismissed, and pushed aside, he finally saw people standing for him, not out of pity, but out of respect. Clyde realized he was losing control. He tightened his grip on his clipboard. "Mr. Walker," he said coldly, "the board will reconvene later today. Expect an official notice by tonight." They turned and walked away, but their faces revealed something new: uncertainty. For the first time, they weren't the ones in power. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a retired nurse placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Don't let them break you," she whispered. "You fought for all of us. Now it's our turn to fight for you." Daniel looked down at the flag waving in the porch-light breeze, its colors soft in the morning sun. For the first time since the accident that changed his life, he didn't feel disabled. He felt unstoppable. And deep inside, he knew the HOA had just made the biggest mistake of its life. Because by nightfall, something was coming. Something none of them were prepared for. Something that would change the entire neighborhood forever. For the first time since the conflict began, the HOA board realized they weren't just dealing with a disabled veteran. They were facing a man who had spent his entire life mastering one thing: how to stand his ground with dignity. The neighborhood was silent the next morning. Cars slowed as they passed his house. Curtains shifted. People whispered. Everyone knew today was the day the HOA had promised to take legal action, whatever that meant. But the veteran Daniel Hayes didn't panic. He woke before sunrise. He strapped on his prosthetic leg like he did every morning, counting the clicks not with frustration, but with pride. Every sound reminded him of what he lost, but it also reminded him of what he was still capable of. At 8:14 a.m., a white HOA vehicle rolled up. 2 board members stepped out, Karen with her stiff binder full of rules, and Lewis, who always avoided eye contact. Daniel didn't hide inside. He walked out the front door with calm, steady steps and stood on his porch. His dog sat quietly beside him, sensing the tension hanging in the air. Karen's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Hayes, you were given notice. You have failed to remove the unauthorized structure. We're issuing fines effective immediately." She held out the paper, expecting him to fold, to apologize, to back down. But instead, something else happened. From across the street, Mrs. Alvarez stepped outside and folded her arms. Then the Johnson family followed. Then 2 teenagers from the block walked up, phones out, recording everything, not for drama, but because they believed the world needed to see how a veteran was being treated. Within seconds, more neighbors emerged, forming a quiet semicircle around Daniel's home. Not shouting, not chanting, just standing the way soldiers stand behind their leader. Karen froze. Louis looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. Daniel finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but every word cut clean through the air. "You say I'm violating your rules, but what you don't understand is that everything on this property?" He paused, looking at the small ramp and rail beside him. "I built it so I can keep living a life you people take for granted. I'm not breaking your community. I'm trying to stay a part of it." Even Karen felt her posture falter, just slightly. He took one step forward. The boards of the porch creaked under his weight. "I fought overseas for homes I'd never live in, for people I'd never meet. And now, right here, on my own street, you want to punish me for trying to walk into my house?" Silence. Not a sound except the soft hum of a sprinkler somewhere in the distance. Karen tucked the notice back into her binder. Her jaw tightened, but not with anger, with embarrassment. Before she could speak, Mrs. Alvarez stepped beside Daniel and said, "He's not fighting alone." One by one, neighbors nodded. Some held coffee mugs. Some were in pajamas. Some still had car keys in hand. But they all stood with a purpose. Louis cleared his throat. His voice shook. "We didn't realize how this would look." "No," Daniel replied. "You realized. You just didn't expect anyone to stand up to you." Louis lowered his head. For the first time ever, the HOA backed down mid-confrontation. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. Because the next step Daniel took would change the entire future of the neighborhood and expose something far bigger than petty rules or power-hungry board members. The HOA board met again, this time in complete silence. Not a single smug smile, not a single raised voice, not a single person daring to look confident, because the room was full. Not with HOA members, not with angry neighbors, but with veterans. 15 of them. Men and women from every branch, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, standing shoulder to shoulder behind Eric like a living wall of honor. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They just stood there, quietly reminding everyone who this man really was. A hero, a fighter, a survivor. And then Eric stepped forward slowly, carefully, carrying the folder he had worked on for weeks. No dramatic speeches, no emotional outburst, just calm strength. He placed the folder on the table. Inside was everything the HOA never expected. Copies of federal protections for disabled veterans, statements from neighbors supporting him, a complaint filed with the State Housing Board, and most important, pictures. Pictures of the ramp he built himself, pictures of the flags he kept proudly, pictures of the modifications he needed just to live safely in his own home. The room went quiet. Too quiet. Finally, the HOA president opened his mouth to speak, but Eric raised a hand. Gently. And that alone was enough to silence him. Eric didn't want revenge. He didn't want apologies. He didn't want anything except to say this one sentence. "I fought for this country so people could feel safe in their homes. Don't take that away from me." It hit the room like a hammer. 2 board members lowered their heads. One quietly wiped away tears. Another closed the eviction file entirely. And just like that, the motion was dropped. The threats were gone. The harassment ended. But something unexpected happened next. Neighbors began stepping forward, placing letters of support on the table. One by one, over 20 families, then more. A young mother said, "He helped build this community. We should be protecting him, not pushing him out." An elderly man whispered, "He's the reason we're free. Don't make us forget that." Even the HOA president, shaken and embarrassed, finally muttered, "Mr. Walker, You deserve better than this. You have our respect. And for the first time in months, Eric felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He rolled out of that room not as a defeated man, but as someone who had just reclaimed his dignity. Outside, the veteran saluted him. Neighbors hugged him. Kids waved small flags that someone had quietly handed out. And Eric, the man who fought wars abroad and battles at home, only smiled and said, "I didn't win because I'm strong. I won because I'm not alone." In the end, the HOA learned a lesson they would never forget. You can fight a policy, but you can never break a hero.